This, sadly, is the condition of much of the world today, and unfortunately, even the church. See, having been formed in what is, most have unconsciously accepted that reality as what should be, or at least what will always be. And when we lose the memory of what once was and our imagination, we lose our imagination to see what could be, sadly, we settle for something far, far less. So some wondering questions. In this series, we're offering you questions along the way, questions on the journey, some wondering questions. So, where have you quietly accepted this is how life is? It's just the way it is. Where have you become apathetic? Where have you just accepted the palace fire of the world because it seems so much brighter than your own small spark? What story formed your identity before you ever knew you have a choice?
Well, while the Hebrews were suffering in those mud pits, caught in that endless cycle of clay and straw, an unlikely life was being protected within inside the palace walls. He would be the spark to ignite something new.
Right.
The story of Moses begins in a basket of papyrus, hidden in the reeds of the Nile by a mother who risked everything to save him, because the Pharaoh had decreed that all the Hebrew newborns should be killed. He was found by Pharaoh's own daughter and brought into the royal nursery. Moses grew up with the best of everything, the finest linen, a world-class education for his time, a seat at the table of power. But as he grew, somewhere along the way, he discovered a secret. He was an Egyptian prince, yes, but he had the blood of slaves in his veins. And that dual identity, living in two worlds, eventually came to a breaking point. One day, Moses went out to the construction sites to oversee the work. He saw an Egyptian taskmaster, someone of his own nationality, beating a Hebrew slave, someone of his own kin. And in that moment, the prince of Egypt snapped. He didn't use a law or decree. He used a fist. He killed the Egyptian, and he buried the body in the sand. And in that moment, this is why Moses is so helpful to us. We see him acting out of that old way that he had been formed. He was the caterpillar, eating the same old leaves. The old palace logic was still operating with him. It was beginning to break down, but that's what he responded out of. Moses could see the injustice now, but the only way he knew how to respond was still with the violence that he had seen growing up in the palace and that he had seen out on the battlefield. And so his reaction came out of that experience, out of that formation, the only world he had ever known. And the question is, aren't we often the same? Now, maybe none of us has killed anybody in here recently.
At least not physically. At least not physically.
Not physically, no. When we are squeezed by life, what do? We default to the tools that we were given originally. And old ways won't open new doors. We default to the anger, the control, the palace logic of our past. Even when we're trying to do what is right. Even maybe when there's some new thing inside of us that wants to do what is right because we see it for the first time. Moses' secret didn't stay buried, of course. When Moses realized the deed was known and the consequences were coming for him, he panicked. Because he wasn't just trying to hide a body, he was trying to hide from the consequences of what he had done. And to save his life, he fled. He ran away. There's another temptation for us. He ran until the water of the Nile vanished, till the Red Sea was long behind him, and there was nothing but the suns and the rocks of the desert out among the Midians. He went from a palace to a tent, from commanding armies, or so the Jewish tradition has it, to chasing his father-in-law's sheep. And there for 40 years, Moses lived in total obscurity. And you know what? The desert forms us too. The desert has a way of bleaching out that old story, forming us in a whole new way. And after 4 decades, the prince of Egypt was gone. There was now only a tired, quiet shepherd.
And then on a day like any other day, I mean, he's 80 years old at this point.
Just a kid.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking Abraham was 75. Uh-oh. Does that mean, what does that mean for us as we get older?
The adventure is still ahead of us.
I think. But on a day like any other day, Moses saw something impossible. Exodus 3:2 says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses, of course, was curious, and he stopped, and he watched, and he eventually left his flock and walked over to see this thing up close. The bush held the fire. It held a fire that did not consume what it inhabited. Wow. The bush held this fire, but it wasn't collapsing into ashes. See, this was Moses' first invitation to faith, right? To trust that the God of fire does not destroy what it dwells in, but illuminates it. This was a fire that could live with the wood of the bush without destroying it, just as God was now wanting to live with this broken, fugitive man without consuming him or reducing him to ashes. So from the heart of that flame, a voice called his name. Exodus 3. Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Then God said, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals because you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And this voice, which Moses had heard of, but had never heard for himself, that voice kept talking. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. I have come down to deliver them and to bring them to a land that is both good and spacious, flowing with milk and honey. So now go, and I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Did you catch all that? God says, I have seen, I have heard, I know, I have come down. Now you, Moses, you go down into Egypt. Moses, he asked the only honest question he could ask at that point. Who am I that I should go? See, he's looking down. God says, go down. Moses is looking down. He's looking down on himself. He's looking at his calloused hands and his old criminal record. He gives every excuse he can find. I can't talk well. They won't believe me anyway. You've got the wrong guy. But listen, God doesn't give him a pep talk about his hidden potential. He simply says, but I'll be with you. Then Moses gets finally to the deeper question. Okay, then who are you? Who should I tell them sent me when they ask? And God answers not only with a promise of presence, which he's already given, I'll be with you, but he gives him more. He actually gives him the revelation of God's very being. Just tell them, I am who I am has sent you. God reveals not simply, this is what I do and I want you to go do it. No, this is who I am. God reveals the essence of who he is to Moses, and in that moment, the essence of Moses' own being is changed. When he turns to go, he doesn't leave the fire behind in the bush. He carries it. Moses himself becomes a burning bush, like filled with this unquenchable fire that empowers him without exhausting him, that empowers him to go without destroying those he's going to. He returns to Egypt, and he's no longer driven by this consuming fire of his old story. No, now he's consumed by the holy fire that's burning within him. Wondering questions for us at this point in the story. Where is there a fire burning in your life? Is it a fire of stress or shame or fear that's consuming you? Maybe even destroying you? Or is there a fire of God's presence that can free and empower you? And last one for this section, how might you allow yourself to become a burning bush? To carry that inner fire that illuminates your path, right? Without burning you out.
Well, as Joanne said, Moses leaves the burning bush, a different man than the one who fled 40 years earlier. Just as many of you are different people than you were 40 years earlier or 4 years earlier.
Right.
Maybe today somebody is different than you were 4 days earlier.
Right. Yep.
He's still a man with a stutter and a staff, but he's no longer controlled by that old palace logic of his youth. He's moved from formation to transformation. And this is what fire does. It transforms things. It changes them. Cardboard becomes smoke, and wood becomes ash, and cold becomes hot. And fire changes us too whenever we get close enough to a burning bush to let a spark ignite on us or in us. Things will never be the same. Some of you have testimonies about that. But transformation, this is important, is never just for ourselves. It's also for the sake of every other person still stuck in the mud pits, which is why we come together in moments like this.
Right.
And we talk about this transformation, and we share our stories with one another, and we give our public testimonies of what transformation has done. So Moses hears the command of God, and he gathers his courage, and he returns to Egypt, crossing the Red Sea back again to enter the land that had formed him, and now he understands, deformed him. He goes back because the ancient promise of Abraham is still echoing in the air. The promise that his family, his line would be blessed, specifically so they could be a blessing to the whole world.
Yep.
And Moses is now, of all people, the one bringing that promise into the room right here in this part of the journey. He's an unlikely guy to do this, but that's his mission. So let's imagine another scene when Moses walks into those grand stone halls. Maybe he's the only Hebrew that would ever be allowed to do that. This is a collision of two different kinds of fire going on here right now. Pharaoh still has the fire of the kilns and the golden lamps. That fire that demands, produce more. The fire that says, you, Hebrews, you were formed here. You were formed to be slaves. You were formed for my purpose.
Yeah.
But Moses walks in as the burning bush, carrying a quiet, unyielding fire of faith. And through Moses, God issues an insistent, repeating call that rattles Pharaoh's throne and ought to rattle our lives and rattle every throne and every system in every part of the world. Let my people go.
Yep.
He's still calling that. And Pharaoh, as expected, says no. He resists transformation, as we resist it, particularly when it seems to ask too much of us. How could he possibly do that? That would upset his world.
Yeah.
Or so he thought. But the fire of the Lord burned even hotter. And then so come the miracles, the plagues. God was systematically showing the Hebrews and Pharaoh, both at the same time, that that system that had seemed so powerful had actually been fragile all along. And so they watched together as the Nile turns to blood, and the sun goes dark, and the livestock fail. Pharaoh's palace, it turns out, was all smoke and mirrors.
Yep.
It was a Wizard of Oz illusion.
Yeah.
He was the man behind the curtain.
Yep.
And it was now collapsing in the heat of the true and living God who had pulled back the curtain. And we often find ourselves in this same rhythm. Like Moses, we return to our Egypts after a mountaintop experience. Ooh, wasn't that wonderful? I just met with God.
Mm-hmm.
Only to find that the old giants haven't necessarily moved out of the way. And we have to let them fall one by one.
Yep.
And like those Hebrew slaves, we have to learn that being refined in the fire doesn't mean that the struggle disappears. It means we go strong enough to endure the heat while those old illusions burn away.
Right.
And they will.
Yep.
So let's ask this question of ourselves. What old gods, systems of security in your life, what palace logic, what old assumptions are being dismantled?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you responding
Mm-hmm.
when God says, let my people go?
Yeah. Is it resonating? It's where we are in our world right now. Yeah, Pharaoh refuses the invitation to be transformed. And so the Hebrews also have a choice to make. They also reach a threshold of decision. You know, we've all been there at one time or another, that agonizing place where there's absolutely no way to go back anymore. For them, for the Hebrews, it is the terrifying night of Passover. You know, this is the moment when they choose to leave Egypt. But it's a scary thing. Like our caterpillar illustration, it's the moment of total commitment. When that little caterpillar must attach itself to a twig and enter into the chrysalis. It's a very vulnerable place to be. Hanging out there in the open, easy prey for any predator that comes along and wants to pick it off. And the Hebrew slaves were in that exact position. They were told to mark the doorposts of their houses as an outward sign of inner trust that said, this house and all those in it no longer belong to the idols of Egypt. We belong to the living God. Imagine the tension, though. Outside, we're told there was a darkness so heavy it could be felt. It was palpable. But inside, there's this flickering, hopeful flame, still burning. They're standing on the edge of a new life, but they haven't crossed the boundary yet. They are in the chrysalis of the night, waiting for the signal to move. And they're dressed. You know, God told Moses to tell them, this isn't a sitting feast. You know, this isn't a party. You need to have your staff in your hand. You need to have your shoes on your feet, and you eat standing up because you're ready to move at any moment. You know, some of us are likely on that threshold too right now, knowing there is no way to go back to the old story, the old ways. And yet, I have some hope, but I'm full of uncertainty because I don't know what's yet to come. Where am I going? Wondering questions. So standing on that threshold, what might it look like for you to stop hedging your bets, making deals with your old life, and just step into a total commitment to God's new direction, even while the darkness still feels heavy around you? What might that be like?
Lots to ponder here. We're not done. That night the Hebrews moved out of their slave huts,
Yeah.
out of the only land they had known for generations, into the dry land miraculously opened up for them through a sea that had seemed impassable. Miraculous. And then they stood in that space in between. That Red Sea closed behind them, its roar still echoing in their ears, and they were standing on the opposite shore in a place they had never expected to be, looking back at a path that no longer existed.
Yep.
There was no way to go but forward. And for the first time, this may have been more problematic to them. There was no slave master to tell them who they were and what to do.
Yes.
And boy, don't we sometimes prefer that if we are honest with ourselves.
Yep.
There was for them only the desert and the heat and somebody that says they're leading them. In the Celtic tradition, this is called a thin place.
Yeah.
We've told you about this concept a number of times here. This is a threshold experience between the veil between earth and heaven, when it becomes so translucent that God's presence, which was already there, but it can be more deeply experienced. We get kind of a glimpse of that other world, that deeper reality that's always with us, but we have trouble seeing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And this man leading them, Moses, he had already experienced that threshold himself. He'd been there. He'd once been the fugitive who had fled over these very sands to save his own life, and now he had returned as an image of Christ to lead captivity captive, just as Christ himself would do. He was a living fulfillment of that promise made to Abraham. And now Abraham's descendants are standing alongside of him. Fugitives too, just as he had been. They're escaping. They're illegal now. But of course, they're of a different kind than he had been. They're not only running from their slave shacks, but also toward a homeland that they had never seen.
Yes.
The land given them by God to their ancestors. So when the sun goes down and the desert cold creeps in, they look up and they see a pillar of fire. Mm-hmm. Where are we going? The fire knows. It's a fire that does not stay put. It's a fire that leads. And God is then no longer heard as a name in old stories. God is the real presence with them, refining them in the crucible of the journey itself. And he's there doing the same thing he did to Moses, burning away the dross of that old, for them it was slave logic identities. Right. For Moses, for Pharaoh, it was the palace logic. Both of them are old ways of formation that needed to change.
Yep.
And God is beginning to transform them into vessels of honor. People who are burned with his fire from within and are not consumed.
Yep.
As a biologist might tell you, and the caterpillar doesn't just grow wings one day. Its process it goes through is a little bit odd. It dissolves into a liquid goo of apparent chaos. And that very breakdown is the spark. There's something called imaginal discs inside those caterpillars. These cells that they've carried with them from the very beginning, they serve no purpose up till this point. And those things are triggered by the dissolving old structure and begin gradually transforming into new parts. And this caterpillar starts growing legs and antennae and wings that it didn't know it ever needed.
Yes.
Because there's a new season of life. Must be a fascinating experience if caterpillars have consciousness or had the ability to tell us. A lot of us have been caterpillars, so you can tell us. The Hebrews' transformation from caterpillar to butterfly did not happen in a single moment either, and it involved an awful lot of dissolving and goo and transformation. It took them 40 years.
Yep.
We often refer to it as the wandering years because they wandered.
Yes.
By the way, 40 years is the same length of time it had taken for Moses to be transformed out there in that same desert. See, that way was not new for him. He was leading them along the same paths that he himself had walked physically and spiritually. This is what we get to do for one another, lead people in the path that we had walked. And now the wilderness was their own chrysalis, or like the old caterpillar's body, those slave structures, that slave logic, the assumptions, the formation that they had been given was being slowly dissolved. And those imaginal discs within them were creating them, changing them into something new. Mm-hmm. And it happened repeatedly in that wilderness. It happened in Marah, where the bitterness of the water met the sweetness of his provision. And it happened at Sinai, where the mountain trembled and the law became a love letter, defining people not by the quotas of work they produce, but by their covenant, by relationship. It happened again and again at the tabernacle, that tent they built in which they could meet God, where a group of ragtag brick makers were transformed into a nation of priests.
Yes.
Over time. The desert was a place where they stopped asking, what must we do for our master? And began asking, who are we in relationship? Who are we in our relationship with God and with each other? And every mile of burning sand became a moment of ongoing transformation.
Yep.
Where they together became a living tabernacle, where the Pharaoh God could finally rest, not just above them as a pillar, but within them as burning bushes. Now, here's something radical.
Yep.
It's one thing to say Moses saw a burning bush. It's one thing to say Moses became a burning bush. There are stories, by the way, of him glowing with a radiance.
His face would shine.
Yeah. But God still turns people into burning bushes today.
Yep.
And maybe you'd want to look around you if you want to believe that that is true. Not just in this room, but outside of it too, where you see the flame of God's presence in the eyes and the hearts and the spirits of all God's people, wherever they are, become those burning bushes. Well, here's another wondering question or two for you. Ask yourself, who am I now? Or who might I become? Because I walk through this wilderness of transformation. Who are you being transformed into? And then, but let's also ask it in the plural. Who are we now? And who might we become if we continue to be transformed in relationship with our God and with each other?
It's a deeper way of looking at the story, isn't it? I think that's what this story is really all about for us anyway. Well, finally, the children of Israel come for 40 years, and now they're standing on the banks of the Jordan River. And this is the moment of reformation. So formation becomes transformation. Then transformation, where everything kind of breaks down, needs to become reformation. We're reformed for the new, for the next season. All right, it's a moment of reformation, where the transformed butterfly must emerge from the chrysalis or die within it. It's really interesting. Unlike transformation, where it's not about doing, the caterpillar, the children of Israel, it wasn't about doing anything. It was about being undone. It was about surrendering into the process of being changed. But when we come to reformation, it requires engagement. It requires us then to do something. Think about it. The chrysalis doesn't magically open wide in one moment and then the butterfly comes out. No, that butterfly inside has to struggle with all its strength to break through and to break out. And it's the pressure itself. It's that very pressure, that tension of pushing out against the interior walls of that old life that held it. That's what forces the fluid. Actually, it's like a life fluid that's forced out into the wings. Without being strengthened by the struggle to emerge, the butterfly would never be able to fly. So rather than going blindly, the children of Israel, they're standing there, staring across the river into the promised land. And rather than just go blindly, what do? They send 12 spies ahead. You know the story. They go in to check out the situation. When they return, they give different reports. 10 of them act like caterpillars. They say, all we can see, there's giants in the land, and there's these fortified cities, and we just look like grasshoppers to them. They were terrified. They wanted to run back into safety. Why? Because their emergence wasn't yet complete. Joshua and Caleb, on the other hand, felt strength, like pulsing in their new butterfly wings. They stood there with eyes that had been transformed. They were changed. They didn't see a threat. They saw a home. They saw abundance. And they knew that struggling with the giants in the land was the very thing that was going to strengthen them and teach them how to fly. Of course, this speaks symbolically to us of our need to wrestle with the giants within us, in our own land, in order to be strengthened in Christ to use our resurrection wings to fly. And it's no accident that early Christians used the metaphor of the butterfly, what we're using in this message this morning. They used this butterfly metaphor to speak of the mystery of Jesus' resurrection. Almost like he came down, Philippians 2, laid aside his divinity and came down like a caterpillar, like us, became one of us little caterpillars, and showed us what it means to be human. Formation. Then the transformation of the cross, all the suffering. And the tomb is the chrysalis, out of which he is raised, alive and resurrected. He's reformed, and so are we in him. So this speaks of the mystery of Jesus' resurrection, of our resurrection in him. So back one more time to the story. All the people, all the children of Israel, what did it mean? Did it mean some were excluded and didn't get to cross over because everyone's transformation and reformation happens in its own timing? No. See, all the people kept choosing to push through, even after they crossed over into the promised land. And each would keep emerging in his or her own timing. Again, the Celtic Christian traditions speaks of this as peregrinatio, and we've talked about this before. That's the word that basically means the pilgrimage journey. This journey that requires leaving the familiar shore behind to seek the place of resurrection. That holy place where the old slave identity finally dies and the new free life in Christ can truly begin. It's the realization we don't need to be finished in order to enter the promised land. We're already there in Christ. And while we're there, as we keep journeying together, we get to keep emerging one step at a time. So reformation continues on as we cease being simply, in our own minds and hearts, rescued refugees who are running from a cruel taskmaster. That's only the first part of it. We allow ourselves to become carriers of the flame, who are flying toward our calling, the calling that was written in your cells and mine before we were ever born. Wondering questions. So, where are you right now in this grand process? You can probably, as we've been asking questions all along, seeing your own journey along the way. And at some point, we're at all of these places, but where are you now in this grand process? And if you're standing on the threshold of a new thing that God's doing, simply, are you willing to stretch your wings and fly into the unknown, trusting that there is far more than you can imagine there?
Well, that's the end of this week's story. The story continues from the biblical narrative. Our story, of course, is still going on. There's an opportunity for us to respond to this a little more physically, a little more tangibly today. There's a table of invitation in front of us.
Yeah.
And when we move toward this table in a moment, we're going to find it to be a place of formation, transformation, and reformation. Before we do that, however, let's pause for a moment, like those Hebrews did on the banks of the Jordan River, and let's revisit those wondering questions a little bit. Yep. Maybe you want to bring one of them forward with you. Where have you quietly accepted this is just how life is? What story formed your identity?
Yeah.
Where in your life is there a fire currently burning? Yep. And what kind of fire is it? Is it stress? Is it fear? Is it the fire of God? Right. What are you going to do with that fire?
Yeah.
Maybe let yourself become a burning bush. What's breaking down? What old systems, assumptions, what securities, what old ways of being in the world are being dismantled? And how are you responding to that?
Yep.
Standing on a threshold, and some of us are in a threshold moment. I think our world is in a threshold moment.
We're in a chrysalis.
Well, might it look for you to stop hedging your bets and lean in a total commitment with God, trusting the unknown future? Maybe it's a moment to ask yourself, who am I? Who might I become if I continue walking this way? Who are we? Who might we become if we could keep walking this way? And finally, if you are standing on that threshold, are you willing to stretch your wings and fly into the unknown? Wow. Maybe there's one in particular of those that reflects where you're at this morning and you can bring with you to this table.
Yeah. Well, let's move the story up several thousand years to another Passover night where Jesus sat with his friends around a table in the shadow of his own coming departure. He took unleavened bread, like the bread of the fugitive, and he broke it. He took the cup of promise, a new promise, new covenant, and offered it to all who would come and trust. He was standing at the edge of his own Jordan, about to lead the greatest exodus in history, from this world right on into the world to come. And Abraham and all of his descendants were cheering him on from the great cloud of witnesses. In our tradition here at Hosanna, we don't come to this table believing that the bread and the cup changed their substance. There are some Christians who believe that. Rather, we come to celebrate. We come to celebrate that we're being changed, right? That the bread and the cup are outward signs of an inward, transformed reality. And yes, Jesus is the bread broken, and he is the cup poured out. And because we've received him, we are now his body. We are now that bread broken. We're his hands, we're his feet, we're his heart. And we're called to be his blessing to the whole wide world.
So come then. If you are on the ancient journey yourself, if you are in that lifelong process of being transformed by Christ, or come today if you simply wish to be, and are opening your heart to him to invite him to reform a life that is or will be dismantled.
Yes.
All are welcome here at this table. Come, take the bread and the cup. Invite you to come down the center aisle if you could, and then return to your seats in the loving presence of I am that I am. And if those at home are hearing this now or later, please do the same. You can join us in the same journey. That journey that is very ancient but ever new. Notice it's a table of flame. Just watch your arms as you reach for things here.
Yes.
Please.
Or else they'll become living flames themselves. Yes. Which isn't a bad it's not a bad metaphor. Yeah.
Come.
already taken the bread and the cup for yourself? We can go ahead. We forgot to give you those instructions, whether to wait or not. So let's eat and drink. It feels always like such an honor and a joy to be able to stand here and just kind of receive you all and see your faces. And you all look beautiful in candlelight. You look beautiful in the fire.
It's just lovely.
Yes. Here is, as we close, a story, again, we talk about the Celtic Christian tradition a lot. Now we're going to move over to the Christian desert tradition. Again, early on, maybe 4th century. There's a story told in that tradition of Abba Joseph. And it said that one time he was with a brother who was asking questions. I've done everything that I know to do. What else can I do? And Abba Joseph put his hands up like this in front of him and just stretched out his fingers toward heaven. And then his fingers, all 10 fingers, became like 10 lamps of fire. Each finger was burning. And he says to his brother, if you want, you can become all flame. That's the blessing that we want to close with today. Together, may we become all flame, so the world may come in curiosity, stand barefoot on holy ground, and be transformed into one great burning bush to the glory of God and Jesus Christ. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.